I'm sure you've seen pictures like this one. Is that the kind of picture that springs to mind when someone talks about human evolution? You see, that really is an icon of evolution. Has no basis in fact, because you could be forgiven for thinking that all of those intermediates between the ape and the human are based on sound scientific evidence, and yet you would be wrong. Don't just take my word for it. I'm a biased, Bible-believing Christian. Let's have a hostile witness here. This is Professor Bernard Wood. He's a professor of human origins at George Washington University. And this is what he says. There's a popular image of human evolution that you'll find all over the place. On the left of the picture, there's an ape. On the right, there's a man. Between the two is a succession of figures that become ever more like humans. Our progress from ape to human looks so smooth, so tidy. It's such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go, but it is an illusion. Interesting, isn't it? An illusion. And there you have a leading anthropologist, an evolutionist, saying that.
But the biggest trade secret in paleontology is that the missing link is actually, well, still missing.
Piltdown Man. Now, Piltdown Man, parts were found between 1908 and 1912 in Piltdown, England, hence the name Piltdown Man. What did they find? They found a portion of a human skull and some ape-like jawbone and teeth. Now, hold on now. We got part human, part ape. Put them together, what do we have? We've got another ape man. How famous was Piltdown Man? Well, almost every scientist in the world that believed in evolution bought into the fact of Piltdown Man. New York Times even ran an article back then stating this: Darwin theory proved true. It was featured in textbooks and encyclopedias for over 40 years. But in 1953, several scientists went back to look at the real bones. And what they discovered was this: the bones had been chemically stained to make them appear old, and the teeth had file marks on them to make them fit. The whole thing was a fraud to begin with. Nebraska Man. Now, Nebraska Man was found in 1922. Discovered in 1922. It attempted to use Nebraska Man in the famous Scopes trials, also nicknamed the monkey trials. Now, they must have found an awful lot of this fossil to support Nebraska Man as an immediate link. Because sitting there in Lincoln, Nebraska, at one of the universities there, they had the complete Nebraska Man, his wife, his family, and the environment he lived in. The entire Nebraska Man and his family. So how much of the fossil did they find? A tooth, a single tooth. Now, when they found the rest of the fossil that went with this tooth, they found it was not an ape's tooth, it was not a human tooth, it was a pig's tooth. Let's recap some of our facts of evolution. Java Man, we believe, was nothing more than an extinct ape. Piltdown Man was a hoax or fraud. Nebraska Man was a pig, and Ramapithecus is an ape.
Now, let's look more closely at probably the best-known ape man, Lucy.
And what do we know about Lucy? Well, Lucy was discovered in 1974 by Dr. Donald Johanson. And what he found was about 40% of this fossil, 40% of the creature. Claimed it was 3.5 million years old, and also claimed it was bipedal.
And we find Lucy is drawn with human-like fingers and, sort of looking forward, and then we have toes, just like a human foot and everything, and wow, that's pretty impressive. That's our ancestor. Wow, and kids walk past seeing this and they're convinced that we have these ape ancestors. And what's the question we should ask again? What's the evidence? Okay, here's the evidence. Notice the toe bones. Oh, they're not there. In fact, the bias in the reconstruction of these things is really almost unbelievable. This is one of the skull of Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy's type, and this was what they drew her looking like, in National Geographic. And the artist that drew her this way, or drew it this way, said this: I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate something about where she was headed. You see what I mean? The artistic ape-like reconstructions to make it look like something that it really isn't. In other words, the idea of evolution is assumed and drawn into these drawings and things to make it look like our ancestors. Now notice something here. This reconstruction has human-like eyes. You know that apes do not have whites in their eyes. Do you know that? Only humans have whites in their eyes. You have a look into an ape's eyes next time you see one in the zoo. They do not have whites in their eyes, but this was drawn with whites in the eyes and that sort of knowing-like look of a human.
You're not going to believe this. Nova, have you heard Nova? There was a PBS Nova series in which Dr. Owen Lovejoy, a very distinguished, famous paleoanthropologist, was involved. And he's looking at Lucy's skeleton here, and he's lamenting the fact that the hips are all wrong. They're supposed to be human-like hips, so you can walk the way the Laetoli footprints showed she walked, but they don't look like human hips, they look like ape hips. What to do about this? Watch it. You'll get a big kick out of this.
The perfect fit was an illusion that made Lucy's hip bones seem to flare out like a chimp's. But all was not lost.
This is a power saw, friends. You may want to put your goggles on.
Lovejoy decided he could restore the pelvis to its natural shape. He didn't want to tamper with the original, so he made a copy in plaster.
Notice he's removing whole parts, not just cutting.
He cut the damaged pieces out and put them back together the way they were before Lucy died. It was a tricky job, but after taking the kink out of the pelvis, it all fit together perfectly, like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle.
Look how perfect. You can read a newspaper through the hole.
As a result, the angle of the hip looks nothing like a chimp's, but a lot like ours.
Yeah, now, this is what we call science. You can teach this in the public schools, but you can't criticize it, because if you do, that would be religious. So, well, I think perhaps the best way to conclude is to let an evolutionist himself conclude here. David Pilbeam is a very, very distinguished, and in my view, a very, very honest, as many are, evolutionist. And he has looked at the data, having spent a career studying the human fossil record. And in reviewing Leakey's book, Origins, some years ago, an American scientist, he had a moment of real candor. Listen to what this very famous human evolutionist has to say. My reservations concern not so much this book, but the whole subject of paleoanthropology. But introductory books or book reviews are hardly the place to argue that perhaps generations of students of human evolution, including myself, have been flailing about in the dark, that our database is too sparse, too slippery for it to be able to mold our theories. Rather, the theories are more statements about us and ideology than about the past. Paleoanthropology reveals more about how humans view themselves than it does about how humans came about. But that is heresy. Wow. No creationist ever put it any better than that.
And that was exposed in 1953. So for 41 years, people were taught that Piltdown Man was our ancestor. Do you know what this says? If you find something that seems to suggest that we came from the apes or anything else that contradicts the Bible, then you should just hang fire a bit, and given time, it will be exposed, because God's word won't be contradicted.
How can paleoanthropologists present such a convincing picture when actually so little is known? First, a fossil is found that in the eye of the finder may be of some new significance. Next, the finder will develop a story to explain the importance of the fossil. Then an artist provides illustrations for the story. Finally, journalists pick up the story and publish it as if it is proven fact, usually before any unbiased evaluation can be done.
Now, one evolutionist, in fact, said, Few sciences produce such abundant returns from so few fragments of fact as paleontology.
An actual picture is very convincing when trying to persuade someone, but remember, these are not actual pictures. Artistic reconstructions have little scientific value, as they are mainly the subjective impression of the artist. No artist can determine what the soft tissues look like, such as the nose or ears, or how much hair or fur was present. Paleoanthropologists know what will be acceptable to the scientific world, and they do want to make a name for themselves. Their interpretations of the fossil evidence are heavily influenced by personal beliefs, assumptions, and preconceptions. Most of these interpretations have been proven false, but only after years of study. Evolutionists are the storytellers of our time, and their stories remind me more of Greek or Roman mythology than science. I'm sure you will continue to see stories claiming that the missing link of human origins has been found. But be patient. With time it will be shown that the missing link is only in the imagination of paleoanthropologists and artists. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Genesis 1:27.